Okay, welcome to the March meeting of the Miami Pioneers and Natives of Dade. And today we have Jason, is it Kuvic? How is
Vuic, like the
Vuic?
car.
Okay, the K is silent. Jason
Vuic
is with it. Oh, yes, sorry. And we're talking about swamp peddlers, and his book really is such an enlightening view of a notorious part of Florida's history. And we're so pleased to welcome Jason with us today. And with that short, horrible introduction, Jason, why don't you start in telling us what brought you to write the book and some of the background?
Sure. I grew up in Punta Gorda. For those of you who have ever been there, it's a delightful little town on the Gulf, small town that's turning into Naples and getting really pricey when it wasn't pricey. When I grew up there, our best restaurant was the Holiday Inn Best Western on the water. And now I read in the paper that Punta Gorda had the highest jump in property values in the United States in 1 year, which is sad for me because I have a lot of friends who are teachers who are going to have to get out of there. You know, it's getting crazy. But it was an old southern, and I'll consider Southwest Florida as part of South Florida, an old South Florida town. It was built in 1881. I had brick streets. I grew up in a house built in 1896. And my high school was 100 years old. The courthouse was old. There were old families there, old settler families that had come, cracker families that had come from Southern Georgia, come from North Florida after the Civil War and opened up the Peace River frontier. And so Punta Gorda was kind of in the middle. It was a small, old Florida town, but it had a lot of new developments, new suburban developments. And right across the river from us was a town called Port Charlotte. And I always found Port Charlotte to be wildly interesting. And that's the thrust of the book, this type of community. Port Charlotte, and I'll explain coming up, I'll show you some slides, was a 78,000 acre cattle ranch. 78,000 acre cattle ranch that became a mid-century modern community. Probably now, I'm guessing, has about 50,000 people. When I was in high school in the 80s, it had about 25,000 people. Let's say 12,000 homes, single family homes. It had 200,000 80 by 125 foot lots. They had taken this cattle ranch, chopped it into a grid, a massive grid as far as the eye could see, which they sold to Northerners for $10 down and $10 a month. Sight unseen. So imagine, we all know someone who came down from up north. Some of us came down from up north. Imagine buying your future Florida dream, your piece of the Florida dream, sight unseen. You would fill out a card, send in your $10, and they would send you a map with an X on it, like a treasure map. And that would be your lot. And the idea was that at 56 or 57 years old, you'd start paying that $10 each month, the price of cigarette money, they called it. And then when you turn 62 or 65, you would sell your house, take your pension and your Social Security, and you would move to Port Charlotte. And they targeted lower middle working class people, good, hardworking Americans. They targeted the bus driver, the cop, the fireman, the retired serviceman, right? This isn't the type of person who would go to Palm Beach. This isn't the type of person who would go to St. Petersburg, Clearwater Beach, right? This was the lower middle class retiree. And so Port Charlotte, right across from me, was this really strange community. It had no downtown, no sidewalks. It didn't have a school until 1960, 61. It was the oldest county in the United States. It's still the second oldest or the third oldest after the Villages now. The Villages has taken that over. But growing up, I lived in a small Florida town with families and kids surrounded by a second community of Canadians and snowbirds and retirees who came down there to live the Florida dream. This was different than you would see in a lot of places in Dade County, because in Dade County, you had a lot of commuters. We didn't have commuters. Where were they going to commute to? Right? There were, these people lived off their pensions on fixed incomes. And what I learned was that Port Charlotte wasn't alone. that these communities, there were a number of these big communities built by companies that were known as land giants. The General Development Corporation, the Deltona Corporation, the Gulf American Corporation. They would go around buying denuded forests and orange groves, chopping them up and selling these lots to Northerners. So these are the communities I'm talking about. Can you all see this? Can you all see this?
Yes.
Select Florida communities. This is a map I had drawn up. And so I'm talking about Port Charlotte here, but all around me, Northport, Rotunda, Cape Coral. Cape Coral today, Cape Coral has 140,000 lots on the Caloosahatchee River at Fort Myers, spread out over a territory bigger than Boston and San Francisco combined. It has no downtown, right? This is just lots upon lots upon lots upon lots sold to Northerners. Certain areas have sidewalks, but sidewalks are never part of the deal, right? It's better now, but these were, just think of suburbs of a northern city. For those of you who have family up north or came from up north, think of, my dad was from East Pittsburgh, right? The suburb there was Monroeville, right? Monroeville, PA. Think of Monroeville in Florida with no city to commute to, right? This is what we're talking about. Big communities that were all built, and these were, this area was a little bit dicier and harder for me to figure out, Dade and Broward, because again, you have a younger population base. You have people buying in Coral Springs who are going to commute to Fort Lauderdale, right? I'm talking about these pre-planned communities, these planned communities that were built. Port St. Lucie is another one. Cape Coral and Port St. Lucie today have probably between them 300,000 80 by 125 foot lots, no downtowns. They're bigger than Tallahassee. They're bigger than Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale, right? It's remarkable the size of these communities. And by, I'd say 2050, Cape Coral will be built out. There'll be 600, 700,000 people in this. It looks like, one of the communities in the Valley of California. Anybody knows LA? I think Anaheim, right? Or these communities I don't even know of, I've heard of. Right? Just big, big sprawling suburbs, again, with no cities to sprawl from. I found this in the New York Times. The New York Mets moved from St. Pete to Port St. Lucie in the mid-1980s. And the Mets were the best team in baseball, if anybody remembers in those days. And reporters came down from New York, and they always found St. Pete to be sleepy, old, old waspy people sitting on park benches. They always used to make fun of it. Then they came to Port St. Lucie, which was a giant sprawling community with nothing in it, just single family homes, sprawling forever. And this is a quote that, wow, we've come down here for 6 weeks and we've got to sit here and watch the Mets play. The Mets were dying here. These players coming from New York. And this writer called it the quintessence of suburban sprawl with no city to sprawl from. And I read that and I thought, that is it. That is what I always thought of Port Charlotte when I would drive there. Punta Gorda had an old core city, a small little downtown, not much, but like any other city you'd see in Georgia or New York or North Carolina. You go to Port Charlotte and it was 7 miles long. 7 miles long, just right along the Tamiami Trail, right? And I always found that, what is the story behind these communities? Because they are hugely important in Florida today, right? They always talk about the two Floridas in books, the urban Florida of Miami and Tampa and Orlando that the Northerners understand, the urban Florida, and they say the other Florida, Arcadia and Immokalee and LaBelle and Clewiston, all those little old Southern towns up to the Panhandle. But Port Charlotte was neither. Port Charlotte was just a suburb out in the middle of nowhere. And there were a lot of these. So let's go back to Charlotte Harbor. This is what I'm talking about. Port Charlotte, Northport, Murdoch. And why is it important? This was the first of these communities. And this became a model for populating Southern and Central Florida. Central Florida, I say around Orlando, not the rest of it. The area in Southwest Florida specifically, but then also in East Florida above Broward, right? You're talking about Palm Bay, if you've ever driven through there. Big, bustling community. Again, a suburb with, a sprawling suburb with no city to sprawl from, right? It's a freestanding community. Same thing with Port St. Lucie. But this is where it began. So I grew up in Punta Gorda right here. But this entire thing was a giant ranch, the Frizzell Ranch. And in 1954, it looked like this. Now, what were Florida's ranches in the South? I know we idealize in a way, Florida's cowboy culture of the old days. Certainly it was there. But a lot of these communities in most of the virgin land of Florida at the turn of the century was owned by timber companies. And these timber companies would come through and just chop down whole forests, just denude much of Florida, Lee County, Collier County. They would chop it down, and oftentimes they would chop the wood down, take it away, the lumber, and never pay taxes again. The land had no value to them, so they would just leave it there. And so, in the tax rolls, if you look in the old documents, you could look in the tax rolls in Collier County, when Collier County became a county in the 20s, Lee County before that, you could buy acres for pennies on the dollar. And some people did that. There were large corporations, but other ranchers. And there was a man in Charlotte County named A.C. Frizzell. He was a telegrapher on a phosphate railroad. And he earned enough money to buy a quarter here. Sure, I'll take those acres off your hands. They weren't very valuable. The land wasn't very fertile for farming, not a lot of it. And contrary to what most Northerners see Florida as, this is Florida. I haven't spent a lot of time in Broward and Miami where it's been terraformed over the century, but this is Florida. This is South Florida right here. If you had been dropped in 1700 in a parachute into Southern Florida, and this is what we were given, hydric pine flatwoods. This means, you just think of the term hydric pine. In the winter, Florida's bone dry, right? Florida's bone dry. It's fire season all over Florida. But in the summer, it rains torrentially. As I mentioned before, that South Florida receives more rain in the summer rainy season than Seattle receives in a year. It's torrential rain, incredible amounts of rain. That was one of the problems with the Tamiami Trail, that even if you built it, you would have 6 inches of water sitting on large parts of the road for the entire rainy season, right? It was very hard to traverse Florida. And this is what it looked like. So imagine this is the type of land that was sold. This is what the Frizzell Ranch became, which became Port Charlotte. Other places that were built. By the 1950s, these men who had accumulated these large ranches from the beginning of the century all the way through the Great Depression, now they're getting older. Their kids are getting older. The Florida cattle industry is drying up, right? Texas cattle starts to dominate. Florida cattle was never very good out of Florida. It wasn't good meat. So they began selling their land. So who's going to buy this land, right? Who can make use of land in rural Southwest Florida? We're not talking about 10 minutes away from Miami or 20 minutes away from Lauderdale. We're talking about places that are off the beaten path. It's near the water, but Port Charlotte was 50 miles from Sarasota, 35 miles from Fort Myers. There's no hospital. How can you live here? Who can live here, right? So you're going to see these amazing purchases in about 5 years. Check this out. 1951, 25,000 acres in Charlotte County. This becomes the community of Rotunda. This is purchased by the Vanderbilt brothers. Commodore Vanderbilt's heirs, very wealthy men. One was the governor, I believe, of Rhode Island. This is the 2V Ranch. They bought it. Then they're going to sell it later. 1952, 18,000 acres in Lee County. That becomes Lehigh Acres. That's a big community off of I-75 when you're going north. 8,500 acres in St. Lucie. That becomes Port St. Lucie. That was sold to Gardner Cowles, the owner of Look magazine, a wealthy northerner. Look at this one. 294,000 acres in Collier, Lee, and Hendry. Golden Gate Estates that becomes. That's a massive purchase of farmland, swampland. Some of that land's unusable, but a lot of it is usable. But that was the Collier family having to settle debts. Collier family had a number of deaths. They had 2 brothers die in a short period, and the family needed the money. So they sold a third of their 1,000,000 acres, right? 78,000 acres, that becomes Port Charlotte in the community of Northport. 12,000 acres in Hillsborough, that becomes Sun City Center. And you see this all over the state, right? These old ranches, these old ranchers are dying. They need to settle their estates. Their heirs don't want to live there. The money is too valuable, right? You're talking millions. You know, you're still talking $50 an acre, $75 an acre, not a lot in today's terms. But Port Charlotte goes for almost $4 million. That's a fortune today, and that's a fortune in 1954. You know, a fortune for a rancher. Now, who begins developing Port Charlotte? And this is where I think it applies to you guys, you know, the Miami pioneers. I can't think of a greater Miami family than the Mackles. For those of you who don't know the Mackles, these were 3 brothers. They were from the South. Their father was an English immigrant who was very good at building apartment tenements, movie theaters, big buildings all over the South, in Atlanta, Birmingham, Nashville. Self-made man who entered, that emerging wealth of the South after the Civil War, and they fought their way into being blue-blooded Southerners. One of the brothers went to Vanderbilt, the other 2 went to Washington and Lee. They were well known in Atlanta, but like all builders, many of you have known builders. I did in Charlotte County, that they were riding high and building golf courses, and a year later they're bankrupt and you don't see them for a while. And the Mackles had wealth, but they knew want too. So they were, how can I describe the Mackles? They were blue bloods, but they had middle-class values. You know, even at their height, they had nice middle-class homes on golf courses in Miami, right? In Coral Gables. These weren't men who lived on Cheyenne estates with servants, right? They had middle-class values, and they rolled up their sleeves and they built their first homes, these 3 brothers. So their father gave them some land in Delray Beach in the late 1930s, early 40s. And we're talking about, they were maybe 21, 22 years old. And these guys built their first small homes, which they sold. And then they sold a few more. And pretty soon the father said, let's move to Florida. Let's move our operations to Florida full time. And they began building lots and lots of homes, in working class homes for GIs coming home with the GI Bill. Pompano Beach, but not on the beach, up away across US 1, or, across the roads, up, build homes for GIs who want to live in Florida, who are going to pay with the GI Bill, who don't have down payments. And so they become masters at figuring out how to get people into homes on installments, $10 down and $10 a month, right? The Mackles are famous for Key Biscayne. They're famous for the Key Biscayne Club in Marco Island and the Marco Island Club. But these guys were like Levitt, William Joseph Levitt, Levittown fame, right? These guys were great at serving the middle class, right? Let's not confuse them with the wealthy elite of Miami, right? Even Key Biscayne, which today, I don't live in Miami. I didn't grow up in Miami, but when I think of Key Biscayne, you need some bucks to build there, to buy there. When they built it there, it was a middle class. No one thought it would even go. You're going to live on an island and cross over a bridge every day and commute to Miami? That's dumb. These first Key Biscayne homes were cinder homes. Look at the original homes. They're ubiquitous around Florida. They call them Mackles. The first Mackle homes were called Mackles. And you would say, oh, my home's nothing. It's just a Mackle, right? We're not talking about people who served the wealthy. Their idea was to serve the middle class. Now, this is Key Biscayne when they first built it. It was a coconut plantation. They bought it, and this, what is this, Rickenbacker Causeway? Once that connected the island, this place really took off. But again, it was a middle class commuter enclave. It was never meant as a place for the wealthy. The Mackles built this, and so they had the ability to build an entire community right, from scratch. That's what they did. And so let's think of Levittown at this time, Levittown, New York. This is what people were doing post World War II. Between 47 and 53, I like to tell people this number. The population grew by 11%. America's population in 6 years, so essentially after World War II, right? The GIs come home, the baby boom starts. 11% in 6 years, from 47 to 53. Our suburbs grew 43%. Suburbs doubled, right? This is where life was. This is where the money was, going to the suburbs. Everyone was getting out of the cities. This was the era of white flight, right? Redlining, getting you out of the cities to build these type of homes. Now, they weren't prefab homes, but everything in Levittown that could be brought to the site, built, was done. Everything on site, for example, putting your bathroom pipes abutting the wall that went to the kitchen, right? Building, using cinder blocks that were 12 and 18 inches. So you never had to cut on site. You just put them down, built the house, and moved on and moved on. And you'd have a crew that built the slab, and they'd build 200 slabs in a day. Boom, 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 boom. Framers come in, boom, 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 boom. You know, and you would streamline everything you could do. You know, these homes weren't brought on a truck, but as close as you could get it, you would do that to cut down costs to serve returning GIs. Now let's go back to the Frizzell Ranch. Who can live here? Who can live in Palm Bay, in rural Brevard County, or in rural Charlotte County, or in rural Hernando County, right? You're close to the water, right? The temperature's good, the environment's good. Now we have DDT and we have air conditioning, but you're still not, you know, you can't get a GI to move here. You can't get Ward and June Cleaver with their kids because there's no jobs. There's no jobs. So who can live here? Retirees. So the Mackles realize that, yes, we can build Levittown. We do it all the time. We can build thousands of homes, but we have to sell them to retirees. And how do we do that? And they came up with $10 down and $10 a month to bring in the so-called middle income retirees. And this was a Life magazine feature, right? Life magazine, I can't see the date because I have you guys in front of me, but it's like in the 50s, right? 58, 59, I think what it says. And this was a big deal. Life magazine was like, can you believe it? A city for old people, right? You know, can you believe it? Pensioners moving to Florida to live together. What are they going to do all day? Right. And it was showing them boating and shuffleboarding, and they came up with a culture center, Port Charlotte Cultural Center. It was called Port Charlotte U. And anyone who had been a French teacher would offer a French class for $1, a shuffleboard class. They even had a lawn mowing class. They had a class for boat motor maintenance, you know, you name it, whatever they wanted to do. And they would party, right? They would have a guide that said, you know, they had their own telephone book, and it was John and Mary Smith, and it would say their address and their number. And then it would say from Poughkeepsie, New York, from, you know, DeKalb, Illinois, wherever. And then those people, the New Yorkers, would hang out and party. The Massachusetts folks would hang out and party. You know, this was enjoying their golden years in the sun as cheaply as possible. And so this model sparked so many other people because the Mackles begin spending millions. Their ad campaigns are massive in Life magazine, in name a magazine from the period, Look, Saturday Evening Post. I know they spent, in one 6-month period, they spent $2 million marketing Port Charlotte, $2 million in the 50s. Madison Avenue ad campaigns, right? High end. I looked at the original campaigns, and I even found the original mock-ups. High end, big money to sell this. And so you would read this in Life magazine. Then you would take this little coupon, fill in your name, and give $10, and they would send it back to you, right? And it seems so crazy. Right? Would any of you buy property sight unseen? I mean, not in a million years would when my wife would look at me like, you bought what? Where? idiot, but this was a different age. Florida was the dream. Millions of GIs had served in Florida, training in Florida. And then now you have air conditioning, you have DDT, and you have the GI Bill, right? Which streamlines and makes it easy to buy a home, right? If you're retired now, you have Social Security, you have your pension, you've sold your house. And Florida was mythical. It's always been mythical in a way, but in those days, my dad came from East Pittsburgh, escaped Westinghouse Air Brake, where my grandfather worked. All my aunts and uncles worked in coal mines or in Westinghouse Air Brake. And though I grew up in Florida, we would visit, and we were like the Kennedys, right? We were the Florida Vuics. We were the my folks were school teachers, right? We weren't wealthy, but to them, we were living in, I don't know, Maui. We were living in Fiji in their minds. Florida was the dream. And so you imagine these coupons in magazines, right? What else did you see? Trips to Florida, $50. And it would be like, 4 days, 3 nights, and you would get to come to Port Charlotte or Deltona or Palm Bay or Palm Coast or Deltona, any of these places. And you were trapped and worked over by salesmen, right? Imagine coming to Lehigh Acres in 1959. I mean, these were just places in the middle of nowhere, and you were shown a model home that had all the newest General Electric gadgets. And then you were taken to the hotel, which the company owned. You were given a steak dinner and some bourbon. You were taken to the 9-hole golf course, which they called the Championship Golf Course. And you were taken to the beach club in Port Charlotte, which was on a brown river. This isn't Miami. But you're a working man, you're a cop, you're a fireman, and the pull of Florida was so great. And you've worked your whole life driving that damn bus around Newark, New Jersey. And this salesman is telling you that you can take your boat out on your canal, and if you weave through this maze that's 3 miles long, you can make it out to the Gulf and go fishing every day, right? And so you imagine the power of that. It seems so crazy. But the power of that was immense. And these people could live their little bit of the middle class, working class Florida dream. Here's a general development advertisement. The Mackles own the General Development Corporation. Imagine, this is in Boston when they did this one, but they did it all over the North. You're getting on your train from Long Island, like in the beginning of Mad Men, if anybody ever see that show. You take the train in every day and you get in, and what do you see? Women in bathing suits selling lots for Port Charlotte. They sold these lots from kiosks. You could buy chewing gum and cigarettes in a lot in Florida at the same time. And people did it. People did it. And sometimes on a whim, because it was only $10 down, right? They sold it to GIs. GIs in Vietnam bought lots to these communities, to Cape Coral, to Palm Bay, to, Port St. Lucie. They called these women, they would actually have foreign women stand at doors and say, "Hey, GI, would you like to see, would you come in? Let me show you something." Oh, right. You go in the room, it's free drinks and a video on beautiful Cape Coral, Florida. and these GIs were thrilled because they were that type of audience. What are they going to do in the future? They don't want to go back home. They're going to have their pension. They're going to have an early retirement, $10 down and $10 a month. And that's why you see so many GIs came to Florida, incredible numbers. It wasn't just there wasn't taxes. It wasn't just that, right? It was that they were sold to. And I would say that before Disney, I don't know anyone else who sold Florida greater than the Mackles and those other companies. I don't know. They sold Florida to the North, and they made Florida easy to move to. So these are all the communities. So by the mid 60s, you have 234 companies selling 50 lots or more. 234 companies, 50 lots or more. Now, you're going to see the swamp peddling start, not really with the Mackles. I was careful to say that in the book. They were always honest brokers. Some people would get mad and sue or whatever, but thousands and thousands and thousands of people bought lots and they got the home they paid for. But this is where the swamp peddling comes in, with other salesmen, Jack and Leonard Rosen. These guys were behind Cape Coral. These guys were behind River Ranch, which was a failed development. These guys were behind Golden Gate Estates, which was a ripoff. And the Rosens began selling. They didn't have any clue what they were doing. They didn't have any clue. They used Rader and Associates, engineers from Miami who built much of Miami, to do the work, but they didn't have any clue what they were doing. These guys sold shampoo in Baltimore. They were millionaires, self-made, tough Jewish kids from the streets who had hung together and sold various things on installments. Remember layaway programs? Remember in the old days when you bought a TV and you laid it away? Well, they thought, why are we selling shampoo when we can sell for $1 a bottle, when we can sell lots to Florida for $1,000 a lot, right? We can buy the acreage. We can pay $200 an acre, divide it into 4 lots, sell them for $1,000 each. And that's what they did. They built Cape Coral, among others. And so these are some comments, and I just want to show you. This was a writer, wrote a book about the property meltdown in the 2000s. Remember that? The idea from the beginning was to sell lots, nothing more. No forethought was given to the possibility that someone might actually want to live there. No consideration given to streets or schools or sewers. Selling, not building, was how these developers measured their success. Now, even the Mackles, they wanted to create a community, but so many people bought lots. They realized very quickly, this is where the money is, right? The communities will come slowly but surely, but divide up as many lots as you can and get a big sales force. First 1-800 numbers. Some of the first Watts lines in America were out of Miami, calling 6, 7, 8 million people a year in the North. In the North, it was a joke in many communities. Just take your phone off the hook because they're calling. Barbara Mackle, anybody remember, you know, the Mackle kidnapping? Barbara Mackle in her book about being kidnapped. She's kidnapped. She's held in a box underground, and she's thinking, how are the kidnappers going to call mom and dad? And she's like, I hope they pick up the phone because we always get sales pitches on the phone. The Mackle family was getting calls from other companies to sell them Florida land, right? I mean, so many people were selling lots. And so I looked into to see what did the developers themselves think, right? This is Gerald Gould of Lehigh. He was a scammer. We gave so much thought to selling the land that the normal reservations for commercial properties, schools, all the ancillary things you need in a community weren't made. We even can add canals that ran uphill, right? This is the developer of Lehigh Acres. They didn't even know what they were doing. Just sell it to Northerners. Here's another one, Port Charlotte. Port Charlotte started out as a land sales project. Then core community development initiated to generate new sales, snowballed the site into a city. It's too bad we can't go back. These are the people who sold the land. This is Leonard Rosen. This is my favorite. He had a long day at Cape Coral and they're having a drink, leaning against the car. You know, think he's in his suit with his engineer and he's like, you know, I think we're going to build a city in spite of ourselves. Can you believe it? Right? I mean, this is the type of folks who came in to build Cape Coral. This is what Cape Coral was. A spit of land that you couldn't build on without draining turned into that. And it became much, much bigger. And today, Cape Coral, it's right on the Caloosahatchee across from Fort Myers, right off the Tamiami Trail. It today has more canals than any other city on Earth. On Earth. Think of Amsterdam. Amsterdam's not even close. Think of Venice or Rotterdam, right? 400 miles of man-made canals in Cape Coral. Why the canals? You needed to raise the land so you could put septic tanks in, and then you could sell waterfront lots, right? It was all about selling lots. Now, I'm going to finish with this, and we can talk, but what were some of the problems, right? I mentioned when I started out this book, I wanted to write about scammers, right? Northerners being sold lots that they didn't see. Sometimes you did all right if your lot was high and dry. That's very important in Florida. You know, for those of you living on the East Coast, you've seen those old communities where you know, you have the ditch in front of the house and you'll see water in the driveway. You know what I'm talking about? And you've also seen that lump right in front of the house. Well, what is that lump you're looking at right there? You see that right there, that sticking out? What is that? That's a septic tank, right? That's a common sight in a lot of parts of old developed 50s era Florida. The little cinder block house, little Levittown-like house with a septic tank in the front yard, the water tank, the water well in the back. You keep them separate, right? But what happens with a septic tank in the front and a water well in the back when you have 10,000 of these Lehigh Acres, 30,000 of these houses in row after row after row? When this happens, what happens in Pompano Beach Highlands, right? What happens in a lot of these old communities that are now being redeveloped in Dade County and Broward County and in Lee and Charlotte and onward, right? What happens is the septic tanks get covered over with water, and a lot of them are from the 50s and 60s. There's no state requirement to examine your septic tank, to fix it, right? So they overflow, and sometimes excrement and stuff from the septic tanks gets into the aquifer, gets into your drinking water, right? I mean, these are the problems of selling lots and not really thinking of what will happen if we build too many homes. There were no restrictions, no building codes in a lot of the rural counties. Charlotte County, where Port Charlotte was built, didn't even have building inspectors until the 60s, right? So Port Charlotte was built without a single inspection. Without one inspection, right? Also, sprawl. This is Port Charlotte in the 60s, leading to Charlotte Harbor. In the far distance is Punta Gorda. That's Tamiami Trail, right? It's just sprawl. There's no downtown. There's no urban core. So all of your shops and businesses have to go along here. So today, even though this is a smallish community, I would say to go from Punta Gorda to the top of Port Charlotte is about a 30-minute excursion during rush hour, right? This is the type of sprawling community that is Port St. Lucie, that is Cape Coral, that is Deltona, right? No downtown, no urban core. And so this is a problem. And this is why all of these communities in Florida are trying desperately to build downtowns, to create new urbanist designs, where you have, high rises with mixed use and shops and walking districts, to create some areas like you see in Coral Gables where you can walk around to get out of your car. And then, and this is true, I took this picture in 2020 off of Google Earth. This is Northport, Florida. This is north of Port Charlotte, sprawling community. That's one of the big drivers of Sarasota County now. This is I-75. Northport, when I was growing up, was just lots to nowhere, roads to nowhere, roads to nowhere. Lots built in the 1950s that someone's grandmother's friend bought. People overseas bought, thousands and thousands of Northerners bought, that never took off, right? This is a picture of lots built in the 1950s. And do you see a single home? Not a single home, right? I couldn't believe I could find that today. I remember this in the 80s driving around. We used to have parties out in these places, high school parties. You'd go out here to race cars. People would dump trash in these places. And I couldn't believe that they weren't filled out. I thought by now they'd be filled out. Well, they're slowly getting there, right? Northport used to be nothing. Today, it's bigger than Sarasota. A giant community with no downtown in Sarasota County is bigger than old Sarasota. I couldn't believe that, right? These places will be the drivers of modern Florida, especially, you've all seen your house values and your tax values in the last 2 years, right? It's harder and harder to live in Broward and Dade anymore to afford a property. So where are you going to go? You're going to go to Port Charlotte. You're going to go to Deltona. You're going to go to Palm Bay and Palm Coast because they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of buildable lots still available from the 1950s, right? These lots right here will be built on in the next 20 or 25 years. And so the city of Miami probably never uses the term build out, but Cape Coral does. Cape Coral knows what that means. And that means when every one of our lots are built out, we're going to have this many people. And they can tell you, we're going to have 700,000 people unless we can somehow redesign. Somehow we can rip up some streets and create an urban core. Well, you can't do that anymore, right? So these communities will forevermore be stuck into sprawling single family homes. You cannot build anything else in Palm Bay but a single family home, right? It's a problem. When Palm Bay needs a new high school, where are you going to find the land? You know, when a box store comes in, so they compete quickly. School boards compete with Best Buy. Who's going to get that big old lot? Because we're going to need it in 20 years and Best Buy wants it now. So they grab it. So these places have a problem. They have plenty of land, but not land that can be used in the way you need to use it, right? This is Lehigh Acres today. These lots have all been sold, streets, and you see a house here, nothing, a house here, right? And so how do you pick up trash without spending an enormous amount of money? How do you police this area without spending an enormous amount of money? How do you fight fires? How do you provide ambulance services, right? Collier County's had a huge problem with that in Golden Gate Estates. It's very popular now because that's where the land is. Well, how are you going to get water out there, right? Just to get the water, you're talking miles, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of urban improvements needed to deal with these, lots that were sold in the 50s, that were platted in the 50s, right? Because the idea really wasn't, we're not really building a city here. Just sell it, man. Sell, sell, sell. You'll get your commission. Land sold like, remember going to a used car lot and you're on your heels and they've got you and you're just trying to get a car and you just want to get out of here. Well, that's how they sold land in Florida, right? These are streets today. This is Western Port Charlotte, right? They built streets in the 50s. The counties can't afford to pave them. Why are you going to pave them? What for? No one's using them yet, so they just let them go fallow. So it's kind of a Mad Max kind of feel, right? It's kind of a post-apocalyptic kind of feel of some of these communities. And let me show you this. This is the last thing I want to talk about. When I was a kid, there were all these urban legends about marijuana flights landing on these roads to nowhere, these lots that were sold that no one built on. And I thought, nah, that's not true. That's not true. Well, it is true. It is true. This is article after article after article. And what it was drug dealers from the Caribbean would fly over Miami, fly around Miami and land in these empty communities. Then they would unload. This is the one I like. They were looking for the pilot in Rotunda in Charlotte County. Deputies and customs agents continue to circle on foot in vehicles looking for a man described as looking like Lyndon Johnson. Right? And so this is Golden Gate Estates. Look at this one. This is in the 80s, 175 million in cocaine. And look at the street, look at the road. This was supposed to be, Levittown, but it never happened. It never built. But those lots are still there. This is another one, Cape Coral. We figure as much as 90% of all marijuana smuggled into the United States comes here from Colombia, South America. And we figure as much as 80% of that 90% is touching American soil somewhere in Southwest Florida. You would just land on an empty street. Land on an empty street. And this is what these communities were. Okay, this is the last thing. This is Palm Bay. Palm Bay is in Brevard, I believe, north towards your area, but north. There's an area called the Compound in Brevard today, 2.8 square miles, streets and roads to nowhere. That's just undeveloped. And Brevard has said, no, Palm Bay, we're not going to give you any permission to build here. These are single family lots. This isn't acreage, this isn't a farming house. This isn't a ranch house. This is a single family home site. No, you can't build there because we're not going to send ambulances out here for you. And we're not going to spend money for cops and we're not going to spend money. So they've left it. And today you just have this weird, you can find it on Google Earth. It's called the Compound. I don't know where it got the name. I spoke to the mayor of Palm Bay and he said, I have no idea. It's the Compound. And so the last thing, and I keep saying that, where the real swamp peddling comes in, and I'll leave it here, is these developers realized that, yes, we want to sell homes. Yes, we want to do that. But the lot sales are very important. Lot sales make up our money. But if you sold a lot for $10 down and $10 a month, you had to provide that home site by law within 10 years. It had to have a road and minimal improvements, ditches in order, septic tanks, some water. But you had to provide that. And if you didn't provide that, that was fraud, right? You're promising that $10 down, $10 a month at the end of this $900 or whatever it cost, you will have a lot and you could go to Florida. Well, the problem was these developers realized, yeah, they're making a ton of money, but they could see we're on the hook. We're on the hook for, 100 million in 10 years. We still promise them these streets, these lots. And so a lot of developers came up with the idea, forget Port Charlotte, forget Palm Bay, forget home sites. Let's just sell raw acreage. Let's just sell land out in Monroe County. Let's just sell land out in Collier or far western Dade, right? Let's sell land that you cannot build on, that you will never build on. Let's sell it for $300 an acre, $400 an acre, and then we'll imply that it's usable. We'll imply that Golden Gate Estates is a place where you can build a home, or we'll lie, not in print. All this stuff right here says ain't nothing going to be built here. All that stuff, lawyers have looked it over, but the average Joe, think of a housewife in Poughkeepsie, husband's a plumber. She's heard over the phone that, oh, this is going to be a booming suburb someday. And so they begin selling lots in places like Golden Gate Estates, in places like River Ranch. And today they call them ghost subdivisions. Daytona Beach. If you go west of Daytona, head out into wherever, they have streets, or who knows who owns the land, who knows what your rights are, but hundreds of thousands of people own deeds and lots in Florida that can never be built on, and no one knows what to do with them, and no one can change them. Right? They're big problems. River Ranch is a nutso. It's south of Orlando, right? And this was just a land scam, right? Thousands of people bought these lots thinking that someday they could build a house there when they couldn't. In the fine print, it said, you're never going to build here. This is just raw acreage. But people didn't know that, right? If you go on Alligator Alley to Naples, you hit Golden Gate Estates. The state eminent domained Golden Gate Estates, the southern part, 55,000 acres. It was a big fight, right? But you can't use it. Collier can't provide you with services. It's in the muck. You just can't do it. It's going to take billions and billions to give you roads and billions to give you water and drainage, and you're going to destroy the environment. So the state eminent domained it, and now it's I believe the Picayune State Forest. I have a friend who lives in Lauderdale. She's a biologist, and her job is to drive over there every so often, and they're figuring out ways to take the roads out, to take the ditches out, and to return it to the Everglades, to undo a land scam. And that's just one, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens. So what the Mackles started was a legitimate community building venture, right? It kind of had clay feet, $10 down, $10 a month. But Frank Mackle very famously said, look, we weren't trying to rip people off. We came up with a $10 down, $10 a month deal, but it let in a lot of bad people who abused the business, right? A lot of bad people who abused the business. And so this was the book, right? The $10 down, $10 a month revolution, and the communities that it created and the problems that they left us with, right? And it all started with the Mackles of Miami, the Mackles of Coral Gables. Fascinating people. They actually need a biography desperately. They're, to me, among the top 5 most important people in the history of Florida. You think of Flagler and Plant, the Mackles have to be there because they built whole cities. Whole cities came from the Mackles. Marco Island, Port Charlotte, Port St. Lucie, Deltona, Spring Hill. They founded cities that in the next 50 years, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of Floridians will live in, which is fascinating. And they're largely forgotten in Florida history. So, all right, sorry if I went over, sorry if I talked too much, but thank you.
I think that was absolutely fascinating and a great background. And I think, probably everybody here knows somebody who had a connection to coming to Florida from one of these deals, or an aunt, like you say, who invested $10 down, you could just throw the money, a little bit of your egg and butter money, or whatever you call it, and in the envelope, and what do you really got to lose, right? So I think
That
it
was
was
the idea.
important also to point out that the Mackles were probably the straightest of these
Oh, easy.
sellers, and then the
Straight
door was
shooters.
just open. And
Yep.
Elizabeth asked a question: what time did the shift from housing to just
Lot
lots
sale.
occur? And I guess that was under pressure, and some guys sitting around having a drink and thinking, what's the next way to run this thing, right?
Yeah. For those of you who moved from the north, even today, was a college professor. My wife is. We've had 4 houses in 4 states. It ain't easy to move, even with people moving you. You've all moved somewhere, and so just that all these people moved to Florida. It's not that easy, and it's not that easy. It's easy to buy a lot. It's difficult to buy a house or to build a house, 7 states away when you live in New York and you're wrapping up your life and you're leaving everyone and you're leaving your local bar. So the Mackles found, though the houses were cheap, usually about $6, $7 grand, $8 grand, it still wasn't that easy. People would buy the land and then back out, or dad would die, or mom would die, or they'd get cold feet.
Yeah.
So they realized that, yes, they could sell the homes, but it's still not that easy to get them down. They're coming down and they're going on tours like crazy. But it's easier to sell them that lot. And then you get sales forces involved, right? And then they have quotas, and they, they use tricks. In my book, it's hilarious. Some of the stuff in Cape Coral, for example, when a couple would come down and be like, oh, we're going to church tomorrow, they'd give them a guy who had failed out of seminary. Or, if a single woman came, they'd get the good looking guy. They were working it just like, you felt that way in a car lot before, that you're getting worked over, even maybe you're not, but you feel that way. And so once the sales forces got involved, the call centers got involved, once the coupons got involved, which was pretty early on. I mean, the Mackles realized within a year that, they sold 4,000 homes in Port Charlotte, which was a good number, but they've sold 35,000 lots. Any idiot could see that's where the money is. And so even if the Mackles didn't really like lot sales, and they said they didn't, they never turned one away. They're businessmen, they're not dummies. And so that's the problem. I think this happened in spite of their wishes, but they went along with it because it made them very wealthy. All right. I mean, this was a revolution in land sales. And these companies, I'll quit talking. These companies became Fortune 500 companies. They were on Wall Street. So now you got stock involved, and you've got investors involved, and expectations involved, right? And so, and the last thing that's fascinating is you could put down in those days that if you sold a lot and you got $10 in the mail, you could put down as income $895. You could put the whole value of the lot. So these companies had wildly inflated bottom lines that Wall Street loved. So Deltona at one time was $70 a share. They made big bucks. The problem with the Mackles, they hung on too long. They didn't realize the model shifted, and then they almost went bankrupt. But that's in answer to your question.
And then I think actually you could say when the creek dried up, along came timeshare.
Yeah.
And then you got those same poor salesmen that were out of work, or now timeshare.
Yep, absolutely.
New thing. And so anyway, but it's such an iconic part of Florida to sell land to people and sight unseen. And you can just imagine some of the guys in the bowling league together on Thursday nights in Cleveland, like, hey, I threw $10 down on this thing. We're all going to retire within a couple of years of each other. Why don't we see if we can get some lots in the same neighborhood there, and we go fishing,
Oh, I'll tell you a funny story. Growing up, Punta Gorda, I love because it was an old town. I felt like I was part of old Florida, but I could always laugh at Port Charlotte. It was my rival. I went to Charlotte High School and I hated Port Charlotte, right? But you drive up there and it was just this big suburb. And if you got to the northern part, it started to filter out into nothing on Tamiami Trail. And to the left, when I was a kid, was the worst tourist attraction in the world, I believed. It was the National Policeman's Hall of Fame. It was the National Policeman's Hall of Fame. And I'm not anti-cop. I'm just like, who stops their car, in the middle of nowhere
Did it have a police car up on the roof? or
It
something?
had a guillotine in it.
Oh, wow, that says a
And,
lot.
I mean, it was the worst thing. And then I found out later the Mackles had built them a mid-century modern building right on the road. And what they did was they would bring cops from Chicago. They would advertise and give money on the side to policemen's unions
Yeah,
and advertise in their magazines. And so you're a cop, you walk the beat for 30 years. You come down and they go, oh, we're going to take you to the police. Oh, thank you for your service. That kind of stuff. It was a scam. It was a come on. It's like so many things. These companies bought amusement parks. Remember in Miami, there was a place called Musa Island.
yeah.
It was Musa Island, right? Something like that. Gulf America bought that. And so you're walking in from your car and they start selling you lots. They start working you over.
Yeah.
That's what they did. They made so much money that all these companies, the Mackles were in Miami, Gulf American, they were all in Miami, all of them. They weren't in Punta Gorda, they weren't in Fort Myers. And Gulf American made so much money, they had the Gulf American galleries to hold their Van Goghs that they had purchased. And Leonard Rosen, who was the real scammer, he's like, I could keep these in my house. Why don't I open a gallery and then work people over and sell them lots in Miami?
Really?
The best art museum for a long time in Miami. Literally, I don't know about the Miami Museum of Art, but I know that in the 50s, some of the best art in Miami was the Gulf American Gallery, where they'd go, after this, we can take you over, one night in Golden Gate Estates, and they'd work you over and sell you lots. I mean, that's what they did.
And John has asked a question. What about these religious communities like Deseret and Brevard? Is that a different angle on the whole thing, like the LDS community?
No. I think that what you're seeing is the end. I have a chapter, the epilogue in my book is called "The Last of the Best of Florida," and it is about Babcock Ranch. And growing up, Babcock Ranch was 90,000 acres in Charlotte, bordering Lee. A little bit in Lee, but most of it was in Charlotte. And I had a friend whose father in the 1980s he'd come in every 10 days. He was in a posse out on the ranch. He rode a horse every day and lived under, outside working the Babcock Ranch. Babcock died. The state, and long story short, it became a new development.
Yeah.
This man bought it for hundreds of millions. Sid Kitson, I think from Palm Beach, he bought it and gave a good portion of it, 70,000 acres to the state, and to be allowed to build a new city. And so you're looking at the last land available in Florida. And I don't know about when, the Mormon Church, LDS, that Deseret, I think, bought this ranch at some point, but it was the same deal. It was a big, big ranch that some old rancher probably accumulated, some family, right? And they decided to sell out. The LDS bought it, and they've been working it and using it as a working ranch in various ways, plus farming. They use everything from hemp to timber to cattle to sheep to alpacas to whatever, hunting. But now they're ready to sell it because there's so much pressure for Florida land. And Babcock was one of the last of the ranches. Deseret will be one of the last of the ranches. I don't know how many are left, but there's not many. And they're pushing up, now with the villages going up there, anything's free game up there. They're trying to extend an interstate up there, and they're trying to, you'll start seeing them sell by Tallahassee soon enough. The Mackles tried it and failed. They had a development, I forget what it was called. It's on my map, but they tried to sell up there as well. It was just too remote for most Northerners. But now that's coming too, right? I mean, there's not enough housing, and there's this huge push in Florida, and the property's too valuable. So that's what I know about Deseret. Same as Babcock. It's the same kind of deal.
And I know that Babcock, if I'm not mistaken, has the distinction of having the largest solar electric array of a private community. So in other words, somewhere along the way, they decided to absolutely have their own electricity. They're in the middle of nowhere. So any electricity they're getting is coming from a long way away.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I just understand that they made that decision. The homeowners bought into it. And that again, it stands as an example of a community that is remote and wanted to have their own, secure electrical system.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. Charlotte County, it's two big ranches. The Frizzell Ranch became Port Charlotte in the 50s. Babcock Ranch, you're talking about 200,000 acres. You add in the Rotunda, which was the Vanderbilt's ranch, it's 200,000 acres, 3 ranches, 3 communities at different points. People want to move here. The money isn't dividing up, buying by the acre and selling by the foot. Sid Kitson figured out that one way to get the state to let him buy it and build a community, because Charlotte County didn't want it, didn't want Babcock, and
Right.
Lee County didn't want it because they didn't have the supports. You're building a city of 50,000, 20 miles out, right? What are you doing? I was just down there, and I was driving, and I saw, the building is so vast by Babcock that they were having traffic jams with semi trucks on a single lane roads, double lane roads, because it's going so big, gangbusters. And Sid Kitson, at first I thought, I called BS, like, yeah, green community or whatever, you're just selling this. But FP&L built a giant, or is building. I mean, they're committed. It's a green, and they've actually sold it in their promotional materials. They call themselves the anti-Port Charlotte. We're not building in a grid. We're not building endless lots to nowhere. We're going to build concentric circles and flow everything to an urban core. And we're going to have a center with the movie theater and the performing, and we're going to have clubs meet in the middle. We're going to undo Florida. We're going to undo modern Florida as best we can. I tried to speak with Kitson for the book, but I didn't really need him, but I thought it'd be nice. But, he's a billionaire. I had better chance of getting through to, I don't know who, Donald Trump than I would Kitson. But
Does sound like a message that would reverberate, considering.
It did.
If it's
county
true,
commissioners and the state, certainly.
and you would have to be skeptical, but if it's true, it certainly is an opposite message.
Yeah, I drove out there.
Community.
I drove out there just to see it, and I'm an old Florida guy. I've owned 400-year-old houses. I'm like Bob Vila with my houses. I can't. I'm not a guy who does well in suburbs or in stucco, though it's nice. And I drove around out there, and it wasn't for me, but I thought, this is different. This is different. This is a different take on, especially Southwest Florida, especially. It's not bad, and the prices aren't bad. It's clean. They're still terraforming Florida. The first thing I noticed were almost a giant lake. And I'm like, Babcock didn't have this lake out here before. This is all the water being displaced by 20,000 homes. But Florida's going to grow, and we need to grow correctly and intelligently. And I think Babcock's at least paying lip service to that so far. Let's see if it happens.
Let's get some questions here. Anybody have a question? You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Not everybody at once.
This was fascinating. I really want to thank you for this presentation. I know the Mackle, so I'm delighted to hear more about the background.
Yeah.
And one thing I know, of course, Florida's whole history has been boom and bust and boom and bust. And when we see the current value of property, certainly in Miami and really throughout Florida, but I was just looking in the paper today, and there was a 2-2 in Coconut Grove for $1.5 million. And I'm thinking, okay, this was a nice, cute little cottage that, and then you see something for $80 million here, and you think, how high can we go before we have another slide? And you mentioned the Mackles at one point were going bankrupt because the model had changed. And I'm wondering if the model of bringing in millionaires or people from elsewhere and foreign investment, is that going to be able to be continued forever, or particularly as the world changes here?
I think you all, being from Dade, I mean, growing up in Charlotte County, I mean, Miami to me was like, I may as well go to Paris. That was like, Tampa was working class. Tampa was always the workshop of Florida, right? That's the port where everything came out. The ships were built there. The oranges came out of there. The phosphate came out of there. We come to Miami, and the good, bad, and ugly. Miami was Miami, right? This is LA or New York. This wasn't Tampa, and And so I think you're all victims of just Miami's international position, right? It's not just the crazy, millions of Northerners moving to Florida with their pensions and willing to pay more, for their granite countertops. But, you're all victims of just a whole nother ball game of property, for decades and decades that.
Yeah, in addition to celebrities and millionaires, you have people who are in countries that it's not a safe place to really keep your money.
Yeah.
You invest in a condo in Miami. I mean, those words, we have a condo in Miami. I mean, and then you rent it until whatever, and then that's a very powerful driving force that's going crazy.
Well, I don't even know what to tell you. I was on Facebook. A friend of mine sells real estate in Port Charlotte. I went to high school with him, and these are cinder block. These aren't pretty homes. Just a 80 by 125 foot lot with a pool, but a cinder block house. And it's $369. $369. I mean, that's probably not much in Dade, but good Lord, $369. I mean, a teacher, they got a 1% raise last year, and homes went up 25%. Punta Gorda is the highest in the country. How on earth can people live there anymore? I know it's a problem in Collier County. Collier's super rich, right? Concentrated wealth. The teachers can't live there.
Yeah.
We're not even talking about, uppity gated places in Miami that people can commute to. You have to live in Hendry County. You've got to live in Immokalee or somewhere, Sugartown, and drive 35 miles to be a teacher.
Yeah, you can't get workers to go to the villages. They have to come from the periphery.
Yeah.
These low wage jobs, and not to mention that we bus people from Dade County to the Keys, so that they can work down there, because that's a black hole. Frank's got his hand up. Frank.
Well, I was wondering, you're talking about the boom and bust, and what do you see is going to cause the next bust? Could it be sewer systems, raising water, rising sea level?
World War III? Yeah.
Well, I didn't start this book as a big environmentalist, but I had to focus on, I'm pro-environment, and I'm generally for government intervention, especially in Florida, to help the environment. I'm very angry about the phosphate spill in Tampa.
Yeah.
That's my world, the Peace River phosphate and those communities more than where you live. And those make me mad, and those make me think about the environment. But I just know, just in my little town in Punta Gorda up the river, a lot of people, if you were local, you would try to get that house on stilts, nothing fancy, but up on the river. You wanted to live on the water. Those are gonna be gone, with minimal sea level rise. So I can't imagine Tampa Bay. When the hurricanes keep missing Tampa Bay, if a big one comes in like Hurricane Charlie, which leveled Punta Gorda in 2004, just destroyed my town. If that same hurricane had hit Tampa Bay,
with a storm surge,
it would be. Tampa Bay is the one that insurance companies have said it's not a hurricane coming to Miami. It's a hurricane coming to Tampa Bay that they're terrified of, because that will bankrupt. That'll be a government bailout in the hundreds and hundreds of billions to undo, the problems with that. So you have too many people living on the water, too many people polluting the water. As the manatees are dying all over. Really, if you guys want to know, and read anything by Craig Pittman. He's the environmental writer who writes great Florida histories as well. He's a good friend of mine, but he knows this stuff, and he can tie it into, the government inaction, right? And, I don't care what party you're in or what I'm in, but right now, the Florida legislature, they're fighting the culture wars, right? They're fighting culture wars. They're not voting on any of this at all. One thing they didn't even take up was affordable housing, right? And it doesn't matter to me what side of the fence you're on. Someone's got to live somewhere to mow the lawn. Someone's got to live somewhere to build the next house. Someone's got to live somewhere to work in the kitchen. And you can't do that in a lot of places, right? You just can't do it at all. And so I think our state government is going to have to figure out a way to not just pay lip service, to the environment, because it will come, and pay lip service to housing, to affordable housing. I understand, if you're on the right, affordable housing, makes you not unhappy, but nervous, right? Going into government programs, but at the same time, someone's got to live somewhere, and no one can live in Port Charlotte on a retiree's income as a retired teacher at $369 for a dinky house. That they're probably 40 bidders. I bet you that $369 house will be 400. I mean, so what's going to happen? I know in Broward, they're already buying up. Companies have already, I know this for a fact, they're already buying up higher elevated properties for the future, for the next 50 years. They're already looking all over the county in Dade and Broward for property that's 50 feet higher than other property. You know, that's part of their, you know. And then the last thing is water. One thing I didn't mention in this book is, you know, Lehigh Acres has 22,000 septic tanks built at sea level, 22,000 septic tanks in rows, right? I mean, you're doomed when the Caloosahatchee rises. Cape Coral's 400 miles of canals. That sounded like a good idea in 1957.
Yeah.
You raise the property, you build the seawalls, you sell the land. That's a smart idea, right? We're using useless land. Now we realize useless land is very valuable. The Everglades is very valuable to life. It's useless for us, but it's not, because we drink from it, we use it. And so what's happened is, over the last 50 years, saltwater comes in during the dry season. During the rainy season, fresh water comes out of the state, down the Caloosahatchee, down St. Lucie, down the Peace River, you know, those pretty old rivers. Well, in the dry season, saltwater comes in. Well, you build 400 miles of canals, those saltwater, that saltwater sits, and it's heavier, and it fills those canals 400 miles, and it eats away at the seawalls, it eats away at the fittings, it gets into the aquifer. So when I see Fort Lauderdale, I go, oh my God, you know, we had friends growing up. We lived on a canal and a house in Lauderdale. We thought it was amazing. But now I see those old 50s and 60s era canals in Lauderdale, and I go, oh no, what's that mean in, you know, 2065? What do those canals mean in Punta Gorda Isles and Tampa Palms, those big canal front communities? Those aren't natural, you know. I do know this, one other thing. You can go by boat across Lake Okeechobee. You can go from Port St. Lucie on the water all the way across to Fort Myers in a boat. You can cross the state in a boat. There are locks, the Florida locks. Well, those locks, they've already found saltwater intrusion in Lake Okeechobee. I mean, it's like 50, 60, 70 miles from Fort Myers to Lake Okeechobee going up the Caloosahatchee. That's how far saltwater's gotten in there. I mean, if saltwater gets in there forever, we may as well pack up and go home. We're all moving back north, everybody. We're moving to the Great Lakes if that happens. And so this book, these communities, the unintended consequences of clearing land. You clear the land, you clear the pines, you clear the palm trees, and you bring in, you know, your ornamental grass from Lowe's. Now you're going to have invasive species, right? What do you, Maliuca trees and pepperwood trees, and don't think for a second that the pythons don't use Alligator Alley as well. All those animals can use the same roads we build to get deeper and deeper into places. And so this is what these communities have meant, you know, not thinking and not knowing. No one, did you ever think when you first came to Florida that you deal with iguanas, right? Never. But lionfish, and, you know, go on and on and on. You know, it's a sensitive peninsula. You know, it's really sensitive. It's really, really sensitive. And I don't know what we can do. Other than stop building.
Well, they could
have another question,
with
Frank?
better sewer systems that
Yeah.
treat the water. I mean, they cost a hell of a lot of money, but
Yeah.
That could help all the estuaries.
Certainly.
And
they've done that in the Keys.
Yeah, they are actually, and thank goodness, and because that's one of their livelihoods from fishing. And if these fish start to die, they're in trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly reverse osmosis plants, you know, for water, you know, those are very expensive to run and expensive to build, but that's one way we can, you know. But you know, they're talking about cleaning up this phosphate problem in Tampa, this giant retaining pond, and their solution is to pump it underground.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. That's the solution. That's it. how that's even remotely, and I understand you pump miles and miles underground. It's a giant, there's various levels. I'm not a geologist, but still that can't be smart. That you mess up, you destroy the aquifer, and then we're out of here.
One of the few developments that I think maybe somebody could be proud of in Florida is Seaside, which was, I think, pretty well developed now. And you look at great cities of Europe and around the world, and planning was everything. It was completely lost in Florida in terms, I think you pointed out very well today, no sense of a downtown, no sense of walking areas, pedestrian accommodations. But Seaside seems to have been I think right from the scratch, a pretty good example. Have you looked at that Seaside?
I've been there. I mentioned it towards the end when I talk about Babcock. It's a new urbanist plans, new urbanism. And that seems to be the model moving forward, right? That seems to be the model. So.
Well, any more questions here? We've been on a little over an hour.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question. I recall there was a reference to how the collapse in the land market in Florida in the 1920s after the hurricanes was kind of like a spur for the Great Depression. Like it had such an effect on domestic consumption that it brought about in a way, or caused, along with Taft-Hartley. And there was some reference like that. Do you remember any research in that area
from that earlier period? I didn't do a lot, only to mention how this second land boom, they've said Florida's had several land booms. They said Florida even had one, in the British Spanish colonial days, there was a land boom, but this was the second boom. And I just wanted to differentiate what I was talking about, so I didn't do a lot of work on that first boom. And what I wrote about this second boom, believe it or not, that there's really hasn't been many books on this. I mean, there was a doctoral dissertation turned into a book in '90 on Cape Coral and a few other local histories. But unlike the great Florida boom of the 1920s, there's been several, Blister in the Sun or something like that. There's been some really good books on that. So look there. I'm sorry, I don't know more than that. I do know that Florida, I have a quote in my book that, how Florida just ran out of suckers, how this thing ended, and, they ran out of other people to sell land to, and that Florida, what brought Florida out like the country was World War II. But I don't really know to what extent the Florida land boom and failure led to the Depression. I'm sure it contributed. I don't think it was decisive. But certainly it had to contribute as pressure on what was to come.
Yeah, I remember this thesis was just pushing that in terms
it
of
seems
the
a little too much, right? I
Right.
Probably, Florida wasn't that big in spite of all the money that was put in. Coral Gables was ridiculous. The hundreds of millions put down on property
Right.
yet to be built. But still, I think even, you're looking at, Southern Florida, you're looking at Davis Island in Tampa, you're looking at Winter Park and a few other places in Florida. But apart from South Florida, it couldn't have really driven us toward the Depression, in my opinion, but I might be totally wrong. That'd be great to know.
Well, it's just interesting also in terms of environmental impacts,
Yeah.
in terms of this environmental impact from the 1920s may have had a contributing factor on weighing on the domestic economy, the war, and or magnifying the international effects of the Taft, Smoot-Hartley.
And in my book, I mentioned the Mackles were on this Florida on various boards that would oversee their industry. They weren't criminals. They wanted control, as any industry wants over the watchdogs. But the Mackles were always saying, you need to stop this land scamming. Stop. Build. Their father always told them, don't build monuments to them yourself. Build things that people want to buy and people can use. And so they were afraid of the land scammers. They were afraid that it was going to besmirch the entire industry. They were trying to build functional communities in Florida. Don't get crazy. Don't overprice these things. You're going to make good money. Don't rip people off. they were dealing with economies of scale. Why would they rip off 200 people when they're going to sell to 100,000?
Along those lines, was there any attempts like Gabriel Coco shows and with the railroads and the regulation of the railroads in the 19th century? Were there any attempts to regulate land use to benefit, both bring logic and rationality to the market, but then also to benefit the larger players like railroad regulation and stuff like that, that research?
No, there were, yeah, you're right. Well, there was a Florida Land Sales Board. And that in the book, I write about that. And what the Florida Land Sales Board was supposed to do is just approve all your messages. So you're not lying. You're not saying that this land in the swamp is usable. So somebody would look it over and check it off. You were supposed to give all your ads to them first. But in general, it was only meant to keep states attorneys in New York and Pennsylvania and Michigan, where people were getting ripped off, from coming after Florida. You know, from trying to get senators to pass federal laws or housing and urban development to come after people like the Mackles and the Rosens. You know, so they came up with this board that was kind of toothless. And the idea was keep people off our backs, do what you want, but don't get too crazy. And they were behind various governors. Claude Kirk was a Mackle guy. You know, the Rosens were Northern Jews and liberals. The Mackles were Southern blue bloods and conservatives. And they fought each other, right? But you know, so that's what happened. But the problem was Florida didn't do you know, these water management districts. That didn't come until the 60s and 70s, right? And before that, the state didn't tell anyone in rural Polk County what to do, or rural Charlotte County. You know, you could do whatever you wanted. Miami had building codes because Miami was too big and there were too many people. But Charlotte County didn't have any building codes, none. Only municipalities had the right by law to issue building codes. Only municipalities. The counties had to go to the state and get a special act of legislature to get Dade County to have the right to issue building codes. So if you weren't in the Miami's municipal core, you could go right outside. You could build the Taj Mahal with Walt Disney on the top, and nobody could tell you not to. Right. And that happened. Some counties in the north didn't have building codes into the 70s. Didn't have building codes at all. No inspections, none. You know, that's why I'm worried when Seaside collapsed. I did an op-ed in the Washington Post, and I know nothing about that world, but what I was afraid of is places like St. Lucie County. They built high rises in the 60s that didn't have a building inspector, let alone law. You know, there's some high rises in some rural counties, rural Lee County, rural Charlotte, that were built in the 60s before even Seaside was built, that could fall down tomorrow, that no one ever, not even to see if the screws were put in right. Right. And so that was the problem. That was the problem.
How did this, just one last question, sorry to take up so much time. How did this, do you know how this kind of rivalry, the political rivalry you talk about, fed into like that, the Claude Pepper versus Smathers, you know, where Claude Pepper was smacked down by the kind of what do you call it, the you know, the, I think it was Ed Ball, and this kind of like state concern. How did that, who was Claude Pepper a lot?
Okay, I can't tie Claude Pepper into this. What I focus on in my narrative, and what I found was there was a bitter rivalry between the Mackles and the Rosens. The Rosens wanted no rules. They wanted to do whatever they wanted. They were, you know, Leonard Rosen once told a salesman, people are here to be taken. And if you won't take them, I'll get your ass out of here and find someone else who will. Right. Just like Glengarry Glen Ross, the movie. The Mackles were not that way. And the Mackles supported Claude Kirk, who was a Republican outsider, who was the first Republican elected since Reconstruction. And they supported him. And the Mackles, I mean, the Rosens supported High, the Miami mayor. And they used their call center to call people all over Florida. I think it was it Robert King High? Am I right?
Yeah.
High. They used their call center. And so Kirk hated the Rosens, supported the Mackles. And the first thing he did, one of the first things he did, was reconstitute the land sales board, get rid of the Rosens, and threaten to investigate them, and threaten to put them in prison for every one of their lot sales problems that were felonies. And there were many. And he essentially chased them out of business. Now, one thing about Claude Kirk, he was Republican, but this was the era, of Nixon was pro-environment. Nixon did environmental things that hadn't been done. Claude Kirk instituted environmental things that hadn't been done, and pushed that big time. And so a lot of the changes that lead to, the water management districts, happened during the Kirk administration and right after, 66, 65 to 75, that era. And so that's where you really have to look that era in there to see what the politics were. And Claude Kirk was only a one-term governor, but he did a lot to force counties and force the state. One thing he did was, put a moratorium on selling submerged land. In the 50s and 60s, all you had to do was buy a little sliver on a river, or my favorite is in St. Pete, one of the bays in St. Pete, Boca Ciega Bay. You could buy a little, 100 feet on the river, and then just get the right to go out into the bay and build whatever you wanted. You could build whole islands, dredge and fill islands, which is horrific for Florida and the environment, horrific. And Claude Kirk largely put an end to that, or at least started the ball, issuing moratoriums. And the state, what was horrible about Tallahassee is they would sell these submerged lands as a slush fund. The Supreme Court needed a library. They needed a nice library. The state wouldn't give it to them, the legislature, so they just sold submerged lands and built their own library. Florida Atlantic, the beautiful new Florida Atlantic campus that was designed, they wanted to get a big designer, so they used submerged land money to pay for them. The Cracker interior senators wanted to have stock show, convention centers, so they used submerged land money. So this was a slush fund, and that finally ended under Claude Kirk. So
That's amazing. Let's thank Jason for being our guest today with an absolutely fascinating look at how we got here in Florida and some of the players and some of the machinations with the infamous swamp peddling. I think give him a hand. That was a really wonderful talk.
Yeah, that was great.
thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. And contact me if you have any questions or,
And I put in the chat a link to your book.
Great. Yeah, it just won the Florida Book Awards for the gold medal for nonfiction. I was blown away that I didn't think anybody would read it
Well,
outside of a few
congratulations on
counties.
that.
So I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled. So
Congratulations on that. That's
yeah,
really
thank you. Thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I like your group and
No, thanks.
oh, wonderful. Thank you.
And I'll just remind everybody that our next meeting will be on Sunday, April the 3rd. And it looks like we may be going back to the Coral Gables Museum for in-person meetings. And if so, we'll make arrangements to also have those on Zoom so we don't lose any of our Zoom friends. And so with that, I wish you all a wonderful Sunday. Jason, thanks a million again.
Thank you so much. Stay in touch, please.
We'll see everybody soon, and just look for your email that comes out a couple times a month and you'll know what's going on with us. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.